to this video about World War II starting in 1939. So 1939 was the beginning of World War II. The specific date that most people believe is like the day that World War II started is September 1st, which is when Nazi Germany invaded Poland. So there had been tension in the European countries before because the neighboring countries around Germany thought that Hitler was bad news, and when he became the main guy in Germany, they didn't like that very much. So previously, on August 23rd, Germany signed a non-aggression pact with the Soviet Union. So basically that before World War II started, the Nazi Germany said that they weren't going to invade or attack or betray the Soviet Union, that they weren't going to have, they weren't going to do anything like that to them. And so in 1939, September 1st, was the invasion of Poland, and then 2 days later, Britain and France declared war on Nazi Germany. And also during this entire month of September, there were plans for the Battle of Atlantic, and then near the end of September, the Battle of Atlantic began. Okay, let's go on to 1940, which is the second year of World War II. In 1940, Germany invaded 7 countries. 7. He invaded France, Belgium, the Netherlands, Denmark, Norway, Luxembourg, and Romania in 1940. So invaded basically means they took over. So they took their rules and their army, and well, first they took their army and they went to the other ones and like took out their government. And then they took their rules and their government and their way of doing everything, and they made this other country do it too. Also in 1940, Italy will declare war on France and Great Britain. Italy, the dictator there was Mussolini at the time, so Mussolini decided that he was going to be allies with with Nazi Germany, not to be confused with the Allies, which was the people who were against Germany. So allies means like partners. So, but like the USA and Great Britain and the people who were against Hitler were called the Allies. Also in 1940 was the first time that U.S.A. did a draft. So draft was, it was like where people were obligated, or I don't want to say forced, but basically forced unless they had like a religious or medical exemption to join the army. So because there weren't enough people to join the army, or maybe the army wasn't like a big thing, and the USA knew that the war was coming, or that they might get involved in the war, so they obligated people to join the army. 1941 was a very exciting, or really like fast-paced year for everyone around the world, because several countries started joining the war. In 1941, President Roosevelt, Franklin D. Roosevelt, signed the Lend-Lease Bill, which was basically that the USA would help the other ally, the groups, countries with supplies like ammunition or food, men, maybe like actual men to fight for them. Also in 1941, the British ship nicknamed, or its name, the Hood, is sunk by a German ship called the Bismarck. and the Bismarck is actually sunk 3 days after it sunk the Hood. In 1941, Germany breaks its pact with the Soviet Union and invades it. Now, I'm pretty sure the Soviet Union was part of Russia, or like near where Russia was, and it was like, Germany isn't that big, but the Soviet Union was pretty big. It had a lot of people, and so that was a big blow for Germany to invade. I mean, they did win. They invaded them, but it was a big loss or toll on Germany. The Atlantic Conference begins, and also the siege of Leningrad begins. So a conference, I have definitions back here, and war means a meeting with a group of war leaders. So like, means they just got together and discussed what they were going to do in the war. Pearl Harbor took place in 1941, and 4 days after Pearl Harbor, Germany and Italy declared war on the U.S.A, and then U.S.A declared war on Germany and Italy. Side note, I might do a video on Pearl Harbor. Let's see if that goes well, because it is part of World War II, so I might do a video on it. Okay, 1942. There was some good progress made for the Allies, but there was also progress made for Nazis, Japan, and Italy, who were kind of like a group. That was like the group fighting against the Allies. So the Wannsee Conference began in 1942. Also in 1942, Roosevelt issued an executive order, so I'll just give a brief overview of that. And Pearl Harbor was when the Japans bombed a military base in Hawaii. It was almost, well, the way my mom described it was they thought by bombing Hawaii or Pearl Harbor that America would stay out of the war, but it actually pushed them to become into the war. So it was Japan who bombed them, and so President Roosevelt issued Executive Order 9066, which allowed the internment of Japanese Americans. So it basically meant that Japanese Americans had to live in separate communities than Americans, because he didn't want anyone to betray secrets that America were having about the war. In 1942, the Doolittle raid on Japan took place, and mainly in the World War, a raid was like an air attack, so it was from the air. Some cases it was different, maybe it was from the sea, but from the definition that I looked up, it was an air attack. The Battle of Midway begins in 1942, and the first Battle of El Alamein begins. There was actually two battles of El Alamein, which is actually later in 1942. In 1942, Anne Frank goes into hiding. If you want to learn more about that, you can watch my previous video, which is all about Anne Frank and her life. The Guadalcanal campaign begins. The Battle of Stalingrad begins, and then the second Battle of El Alamein begins, and also the Allies invade North Africa in Operation Torch. So apparently the Germans, well, I think the Germans were there. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comments. I think the Germans were there and a small part of it, and so the Allies took over most of it. Correct me if I'm wrong. I'm interested. Okay, in 1943 was the first major defeat for the Germans, which raised the hopes for the Allies. So So after the Casablanca Conference, on February 2nd, the Germans surrender and Stalingrad the Soviet Union. So they had previously invaded the Soviet Union, breaking their pact, but then the Soviet Union fought back in Stalingrad and the Germans were defeated. Also during 1943, the Warsaw Ghetto uprisings began, which is, a ghetto was basically a different community for the Jews in Germany. So, all the countries that they invaded, basically, it was just a separate community that, like, Germans were not allowed to live there, and there was stricter rules there. So in Warsaw, the people fought back. The Battle of Kursk begins in 1943, and also in 1943, which again was like a huzzah for the Allies, was Mussolini resigns. I said previously Mussolini was the dictator in Italy, and he resigned that day from dictator. Also this year, shortly after Mussolini resigned, Italy surrendered from the war. And then after that, the Tehran Conference begins. 1944 is the year of the infamous D-Day and a major victory for the Allies. Just a heads up, I might also be, I'm most likely going to be doing a video about D-Day. I'm reading this book right now, and so after I'm done with this book, I will do a D-Day video. I might also, just giving you a lot of heads up here, I might also do a video about the Holocaust, which is part of World War II, but is separate at the same time. So the siege of Leningrad is over after 900 days. So let me look back here. When does the siege of Leningrad start? I want to know this. Let me see. Dead air here. I will find it. It's 900 days. Maybe I won't find it. Maybe it'll be a mystery forever. Well, I won't find it. It'll be a mystery forever. No one will ever know. I mean, you could look it up online, but it was 900 days after it started was when it ended. And then the Battle of the Philippine Sea. The Philippines is near Japan, China, Malaysia, that area. And then the assassination of Hitler is in 1944. As most people know, but if you didn't, Hitler was the dictator of Germany. He was the ruler, and a lot of people didn't like him because of his beliefs, which, like, you might say, oh, that's kind of wrong to not like him because of his beliefs, but he believes that Germans were a higher race than white people were a higher race than everybody else, so he wanted to essentially kill Jews or Asian people, not all Asian people, because he was friends with Japan, but I mean people who didn't look white, essentially. So that's what kind of fueled World War II and the Holocaust. So the assassination of Hitler begins in 1944, but sadly it fails. In 1944, Anne Frank and her family are discovered and arrested and sent to concentration camps. The Allies liberate Paris, so France had been invaded by the Germans and had been under their rule, and now Paris, a major city, is now free. It's not under anyone's rule anymore. The Battle of Leyte Gulf begins, and the Battle of Bulge begins. And 1945, the last year of the World War II. So the Yalta Conference begins. Then the Allies begin bombing Dresden. So bombings was basically when they would fly over the country and drop bombs. The Battle of Iwo Jima begins. The Battle of Okinawa begins. And then on April 12th, 1945, President Franklin Roosevelt dies. Which was, it was sad that he never got to see the war end. So that was a blow for everybody. And then last page here, the Battle of Berlin begins, and then Mussolini, who had resigned, is now killed by the partisans. And then also this year, Adolf Hitler is believed to commit suicide on April 30th. So no one ever saw him again after April 30th. And there wasn't an assassination or a killing or anything, so most people believe that he did commit suicide. And then May 7th, Germany signs an unconditional surrender, which means that there were no conditions. Like, there wasn't anything the Allies had to do in order for them to surrender. And then after, there were also 2 bombings on Japan before their surrender. So it was a long time for everybody, but it didn't end well because there were still a lot of people were hurt and a lot of people died, but thankfully the Allies won, and Hitler is no longer the dictator. So I have a definitions page for everybody. Does everybody love definition pages? I love definition pages. Okay, so a draft meant recruiting, I already told you, recruiting men for the army of war, and they were obligated by law to join. The Lend-Lease bill meant that Americans would help other allied countries with supplies. A conference, I believe, means a meeting with a group of war leaders. I already said that. A raid was an air attack. A campaign is a series of operations related in space or time and aimed towards one single specific objective or result. So it was like a series of maybe attacks or invasions, all leading to one result. Ghettos were communities where only Jews were allowed to live, and there were specific rules. And then the partisans were a secret group of military men fighting in Europe, mainly in countries that were occupied by Nazi Germany, Italy, or Japan. So they were the people who killed Mussolini. So they were kind of like a smaller division of people who were fighting on the same side as the Allies. So that is all I have for my video today. Make sure you give this video a thumbs up and subscribe, and you never stop learning.